everybody, and welcome to our webinar, the IEA's Global Commission on People-Centered Transitions, today with the webinar, Policies for People, Best Practice in People-Centered Policymaking. Thank you very much for joining us, and please let me now hand the floor to the Executive Director of the IEA for his opening remarks, Dr. Fatih Birol.
Greetings from the International Energy Agency headquarters, dear colleagues. Let me add my word to that of my colleague, Mr. Madraway, to welcome you the IEA's webinar on policies for people, best practices in people-centered policy making. I am extremely delighted that so many ministers and leading figures have agreed to share their insights on shaping clean energy transitions that are inclusive, equitable, and that will enhance people's lives. This is the focus of the Global Commission on People-Centered Clean Energy Transitions, which I convened earlier this year to examine these issues. The Global Commission is led by Danish Prime Minister and chaired by Danish Energy Minister Dan Jorgensen. Many thanks, Dan. This commission includes several ministers, leading figures from energy, climate, finance, and labor, and you will see a number of them today in this very meeting. Many of you, I guess, may well know that only a few weeks ago, we published world's net zero roadmap to 2050. We have come up with a pathway which can bring the global energy sector to net zero 2050. And I say on purpose a pathway because it is not the pathway. Every country has its own circumstances and priorities to reach those targets. And as I said, the net zero, the race to net zero is important, but this is not a race among the countries. This is a race against the time. And in this race, some countries start in front of the others, especially developed countries compared to developing countries. And the nature of the race is so that if everybody doesn't finish the race, nobody wins the race. So it is important that we all perhaps believe that we need international collaboration and collaboration of all the segments of the population. Now, across the world, there are many examples of best practices in people-centered clean energy transitions. And the aim of this webinar is to examine these policies, the best practices with good results, and to highlight their positive impacts on individuals, communities, and businesses, including their role in bettering low-income households, people's lives. And as I said before, our net zero report has a very important motto. Clean energy transitions are for and about people. And we are very aware of this fact, and it is the very reason we have, in fact, established, convened this group. Clean energy transitions will bring many changes, and we believe that this must be done in ways that benefit people. And this will require careful policy design, and it is the reason I am very happy that there are many policymakers today joining this webinar, and there are several policymakers, ministers, prime ministers, heads of states, who are members of our commission. We need careful policy design to ensure fairness and to protect vulnerable groups. I believe that such thinking is essential if clean energy transitions are to be successful and to be meaningful. Today's discussion will help us examine these questions more closely and will feed into the work of the Global Commission, which in turn will provide an important input to COP26 and beyond. Mr. Alok Sharma, who is the designated president of COP26, is keenly following our work today. Now, I look forward to hearing your views and policy suggestions. And in advance, I thank our speakers once again for your willingness to join this meeting. And we are very much looking forward to learn from you. And I would like to now hand over to our new, I should say, Deputy Executive Director, Ambassador Mary Warlick, to introduce our speakers. Over to you, Madam Ambassador.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Birol. It is truly my great pleasure to join Dr. Birol in welcoming all of you today, today's webinar on policies for people, best practices in people-centered policy making. Today's event features members of the Global Commission, as Dr. Birol indicated, and several other outstanding speakers to explore best practices in people-centered clean energy transition policies. And the Commission will be producing key recommendations in advance of COP26 in November. I'd like to sincerely thank all of you for taking the time to join us today and to accepting our invitation to speak. I'd also like to inform members of our audiences across the world that this event is available in both English and French, so please choose the appropriate channel for your preferred language. And with that, let me now turn to introducing our first panel of very distinguished speakers. I'm delighted to say we are going to hear from first Sophie Gladima, Minister for Petroleum and Energy of Senegal and co-chair of this Global Commission. Simonetta Sommaruga, Minister of Environment, Transport, Energy and Communications of Switzerland. Thomas O'Regan, Minister of Natural Resources of Canada. Diego Mesa Puyo, Minister of Mines and Energy of Colombia, and Kadri Simpson, European Commissioner for Energy. And we will also have a special intervention at the end of this panel from Selwyn Hart, Special Advisor to the UN Secretary General on Climate Action and Assistant Secretary General for the UN Climate Action Team. So I will turn first to the co-chair of the Global Commission on People-Centered Clean Energy Transitions, Minister for Petroleum and Energy of Senegal, Minister Gladima. Minister, we very much look forward to hearing your remarks. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Madam. Ministers, Mr. Special Advisor, Executive Director, let me just say how pleased I am to be here with you again. Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, welcome here and greetings from Senegal. Welcome to this seminar. Can I, without further ado, thank the Executive Director of the IEA for inviting us to attend this seminar, which is a preparation or in preparation for the second meeting of the Global Commission. Now, together with the members of the Commission, I am honored to co-chair, and those who follow us today, I will share our views about energy and Senegal. 100% of energy should be clean. The example of Senegal in the energy transition shows that we will be able to reach the SDGs. You'll remember that Senegal had committed to giving universal access by 2025, which is in sync with SDG 7 sustainable development and the concerns that have been identified in our country since 2012 and before. And what we now need to look at is build on this to bring about the results. We have a policy mix that an energy mix that now includes renewable energy with solar plants, wind farms, and hydropower. We are, as at 2020, the share is 34% compared to 7% in 2012. And this has benefited from state support across the energy chain. We now have a dedicated agency working on rural electrification. It was established in 1999 and relaunched in 2004. We also have a renewables agency established in 2013 and a third agency established in 2011, working and looking at the economy of the energy sector and producing electricity. Our strength is that the equipment is enjoys a tax waiver. And in fact, much of the renewable energy derives from the work and the production of independent producers. The initial costs are quite high, and therefore a tax holiday has been granted to reduce expenses. This is covered in the contract that is signed with the agencies that bring about the support and the ministries that formalize and adopt the decrees which set the list of equipment and materials that are free of VAT. And customs and the inland revenue are also involved as our technical and financial partners. Now, households have not been very fond and eager to use renewables, which has led to more tax waivers being given to a number of pieces of equipment that can be used for small renewable projects, and that was done in 2020. This has led to a 18% drop in the cost, the acquisition cost for these materials and equipment. A handbook has indeed been published to promote small off-the-grid electricity and power productions, and the corresponding tax breaks are issued by a dedicated agency. Over 9 years, we have been able to set up a number of clean energy plants with a total energy capacity similar to 450-60 megawatts. We are also about to bring online 2 solar plants in Kaonenguni for 60 megawatts. These plants have enjoyed special tax breaks, which have led also meant that the kilowatt hour in these 2 places is priced at €3.80 and €3.98. So the coverage rate has increased significantly. The electrification rate is now 55% in 2020 compared to 27% in 2012. 53 waivers have been extended to private institutions for a cost of €524,000. That is 19.8% of the overall import costs. This tax measure has meant that solar pumps for farming have become more attractive, and they have indeed replaced existing pumps. Batteries, lithium storage batteries, are now more popular, and this has also enabled the rollout of a number of solar-powered lampposts. There are, however, a number of issues still outstanding, controlling and enforcing the tax waivers. Risk management, avoiding low-quality products being sold, which means that obviously standards have to be applied both to imported and domestically manufactured goods. So we're in fact intertwining, in so doing, bringing together research and tax issues. So by way of conclusion, let me just say that the initiative taken by Senegal on this idea of targeted tax support is worthwhile and effective to help support the share of clean energy in the energy mix. This is also being done in a very natural and inclusive way, and we expect to communicate further and promote this with the greater public. Indeed, over and beyond our fellow citizens, these measures also spur companies on their road to change and energy transition. This process is therefore a very significant phase in the energy transition. Thank you for your kind attention, and let me wish you all a very fruitful webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister, for those very interesting and important remarks. Very encouraging to hear of the great progress that's being made in Senegal with respect to the clean energy transition. And thank you very much for your leadership on the Commission. Now, if I may, I'd like to turn to Minister Sommaruga of Switzerland. Minister, please, we look forward to your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear Fatih Birol, ministers, ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to present today how Switzerland introduced a CO2 levy. Nowhere in the world are new taxes popular. Switzerland is a direct democracy, and voters often have the last say, overriding decisions by Parliament. We therefore face an additional challenge, and that's why we need to draft our legislation carefully to get it accepted by a majority of people. This holds true also for our CO2 legislation, which we want to be fair and socially equitable and acceptable. This coming weekend, really the next Sunday, we face another crucial test. Our revised CO2 Act will hopefully be accepted in a referendum. This act contains the instruments for Switzerland to reach its Paris Agreement target of at least minus 50% versus 1990. But let me go back more than 20 years. In the year 2000, our first CO2 Act entered into force. It contained one important element to raise acceptance. We call it subsidiarity. It means that you give people and the economy a chance to deliver results through voluntary measures. The CO2 Act called for introducing a CO2 levy only if voluntary measures failed to reduce emissions. We debated 8 years over how long voluntary measures should be given a chance. Emissions were not reduced enough. Finally, in 2008, we introduced a CO2 levy on fossil heating and process fuels, but not on transport fuels. Transport emissions are partly offset. Offsetting is financed by a modest private levy. I use the word levy and not tax. This is important because tax means that proceeds go to the treasury, which is not popular. People want to know what their money is used for. The most straightforward way to show people where their money goes is to give it back to them. That's precisely what we did. In German, we use the word Lenkungsabgabe, a so-called steering levy, which should steer or reduce demand by raising the price on fossil fuels. Refunding rewards people and enterprises who use less fossil fuels. Their heating bill will go up, but bottom line, they will gain if they use heat more efficiently and receive some funds. The same mechanism is used for a levy on volatile organic compounds to reduce ground level ozone. Initially, the rate of the CO2 levy was set at about $13 per ton of CO2. The law automatically increased the rate if Switzerland's emissions are not on track to meet its targets. This is important. Increases are not decided by government. People can avoid increases if emissions are on track. In reality, however, the rate was increased in several steps to $106 at present. This is one of the highest in the world. The refunding goes to all residents in Switzerland. They receive a rebate on their health insurance. Health insurance is mandatory. Refunding through health insurers is the most effective way with little administrative costs. In this year, 2021, each resident gets $97 refunded. In 2010, we realized that the steering effects of the levy was too small to trigger investment for emission reductions in buildings. And buildings have the largest reduction potential. At that time, a typical family with 2 children was refunded $355 per year, too little to finance several tens of thousands of francs to insulate or install a renewable heating system in their home. Also, a majority of residents in Switzerland are tenants. We had to make sure that the cost of renovation would not excessively increase the rents. That's why we decided to use 1/3 of the levy proceeds to finance a buildings refurbishment program. The other 2/3 continue to be refunded. A maximum of $500 million per year goes in this program. It provides investment aid to reduce a building's emissions. Since 2013, an additional $28 million goes into a technology fund. This fund gives loan guarantees for innovative clean tech enterprises. Not only people, but also enterprises get a refund on their social security contributions, depending on their workforce. This was important to win support from the economy. Still, there is a debate. The secondary sector, which uses more fuel and employs smaller workforces, sees itself disadvantaged against the tertiary sector. Our revised CO2 Act, if it is accepted the next weekend, will introduce an air ticket levy of $33 to $133, depending on flight distance and class. 51% of proceeds will be refunded. 49% will go to a climate fund to finance research and development of new technologies. The Act will also increase the share of motor fuels, which importers must offset. The cost of offsetting for motorists could increase from currently 1.5 cents per liter to maximum 12 cents. This is an equivalent to about $50 per ton of CO2. The Climate Fund will finance mitigation and adaptation measures. Adaptation includes resilient infrastructure against floods and landslides due to thawing permafrost in the mountains, measures against heat islands in the cities, irrigation for agriculture, and climate-adapted trees to protect forests. Much of this will benefit rural and remote communities who tend to be more skeptical against the revised CO2 Act, as polls ahead of this weekend's referendum show. With the revised Act, a typical family of 4 who uses an average quantity of heating oil drives an average mileage and flies once a year to a European holiday destination could face additional costs of about $100 per year at the end of this decade. If by then the family drives an electric car, it will spend only extra $50 per year for the whole family. And if it does not fly or switches to renewable heating, the family will receive a net gain. If you allow me to sum up our experience so far. First point, climate policies are not easy to sell to people, especially if they strain their wallets. And I can assure you the debate in our country about this revised CO2 Act is very heated. And I cannot tell you what the people will vote in the next weekend. You will see it, but it was really a very heavy and difficult debate we had. So, second point, if you tax CO2, people want to know what the tax is used for. Third point, ideally, refund tax proceeds to people so as to reward climate conscious behavior. And fourth and last point, some earmarking of proceeds may be necessary to support climate investment. Make sure proceeds are used for climate action only. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so very much, Madam Minister, for those very interesting remarks and for sharing with us what is clearly a very proactive approach that Switzerland is taking, both in terms of policy steps and incentives, despite the challenges, to work towards a people-centered energy transition. I think your experience is very important and interesting and instructive for many of us. So thank you. If I may, I'd now like to turn to Canada's Minister, Mr. Seamus O'Regan, to share with us his remarks and thoughts on Canada's experience. Thank you so much, Mr. Minister. Mr. Minister, could you unmute, please? Thank you very much.
I've learned even after all this time, I'm never quite sure who is in control of the mute, but I'm happy to be unmuted. Mary, Fatih, to all the members of the IEA, to the colleagues I'm gathered around with, it is good to see some of you again, Kadri, and may I say, Simonetta, I have learned so much from you, but also taken great comfort that I am not alone in facing very similar challenges here in Canada to the challenges that you are facing with your population in Switzerland. I feel sometimes our gatherings are like psychiatric support groups. There are very few of us who are dealing with these issues at this level. And I take comfort in knowing they are very similar challenges. Bonjour à tous. Je vous rejoins de la côte est du Canada.
Good morning, good afternoon to all of you. I'm on the eastern coast of Canada. The fact that I can speak to you virtually rather than face-to-face is a clear reminder of the fact that those past 15 months have been very difficult. This pandemic has changed everything, our way of working, our way of socializing, and all the other aspects of our world.
The challenge of climate change. Climate change is a real and imminent threat, and climate change is one of those things, it's measured globally, but it is really felt locally. We feel it here in my Canadian province of Newfoundland and Labrador. The Inuit region of northern Nunavut in Labrador is just 200 kilometers north of where I grew up in Labrador. And it's losing its ice coverage faster than anywhere in the Canadian Arctic. And the Canadian Arctic is warming twice as fast as anywhere else on the planet. This is happening. And it is happening now. It is threatening our communities and our livelihoods right now. So we need to act now. which means the need for us to achieve net zero emissions did not end when this global pandemic began. And the urgency will only intensify when we finally get COVID-19 in our rear view mirror. But this pandemic has also laid bare the vulnerabilities and inequalities both within our countries and around the world. It has been particularly challenging for women, for youth, for indigenous peoples, for immigrants, for racialized peoples, for persons with disabilities. And it's been hard on energy workers, something that I understand firsthand. My province, Newfoundland and Labrador, it is an offshore oil producing region, similar to Norway and the UK. It is the biggest part of our economy here. I have friends and neighbors who work in the industry, and they are facing hard times during this pandemic. I spent a long night last night speaking to a union head, worried about his membership, worried about the project he works on. They're worried about the future. They're worried about what a clean energy future means for them, for their livelihoods, for the families and the communities that they support, that depend on traditional energy workers. And that's what makes this Global Commission on a People-Centered Clean Energy Transition so fundamental to our success, to our continued prosperity. Because people, both energy workers and energy consumers, must be front and center. There's no other option. We have to include everyone in an urgent, effective, and orderly transition to the clean energy future that we need. Urgent, because we're running out of time. I mentioned an example of the real impact of climate change in my province. If we don't act and act now, those impacts will only become more pronounced. Effective, because we need to target emissions wherever and whenever we find them. We are laser focused on lowering emissions. And orderly, because we need to get this right. And that means we need to take the time to get it right, working with those energy workers who will be directly impacted, working with governments and utilities to ensure energy consumers don't see power bills that rise beyond their financial means. If we fail to include these workers and consumers, then they won't believe in it, and they won't believe in our common purpose. If we fail to put people first, there will be no legitimacy or credibility, and this transition will fail. It will fail. We will be replaced by others. The transition will not be urgent, it will not be effective, and it will not be orderly. So we can't fail. Canada gets it. Canada gets it. That's what underpins our strengthened climate plan. We have put $53 billion into a green recovery. We've been increasing those investments since last October. Canada has made generational investments in cleaner energy with more renewable sources, with greener infrastructure, new technologies, low carbon fuels, including hydrogen, a national network of fast chargers for electric vehicles, connecting remote communities to smarter grids, and accelerating innovations from next generation batteries to the latest in carbon capture technologies. Central to all of this, as the single most fundamental piece of our climate plan, is our approach to pricing carbon. In Canada, it is no longer free to pollute anywhere in the country. Carbon pricing is effective, it is transparent, it is people-centered, it is market-driven. It not only encourages, but it rewards climate action. Industries, businesses, and households are deciding for themselves how best to reduce their emissions and therefore save their money based on market conditions, on price, a price that is set. It puts a price on carbon. It is one of the lowest cost options for leveraging private sector investments, changing consumer behaviors, and achieving net zero emissions, creating good jobs and more sustainable, resilient, and inclusive global economy growth. I couldn't put it any better than John Kerry, the US Special Envoy for Climate, earlier this year when we appeared together in a virtual panel in Berlin. He said, no government has enough money or enough influence on its own to make change happen as quickly as it must. Governments set directions, we set public debates, we bring people along. No energy worker, no energy producing region, and no energy consumer can be left behind. But the private sector will develop and build the technology that we will need to reach our climate goals. And carbon pricing is the key incentive to making it happen. It promotes competitiveness and it maintains affordability. Those are the hallmarks of Canada's approach: an ambitious price on pollution with a household rebate system to keep costs down for low-income and vulnerable Canadians. It's a system that actually leaves most Canadians better off. It's decentralized and flexible, respecting and reflecting Canada's federal system by giving sub-national governments significant control, allowing them the authority to come up with their own solutions and to retain revenues that they raise within federal guidelines. It's predictable for investors, it is affordable for consumers, and I hope a source of valuable lessons for other countries who are thinking of adopting a carbon pricing regime. So 3 quick highlights. First, we introduced carbon pricing in 2016. We brought together all of our provinces and territories. We consulted with Indigenous leaders to create a pan-Canadian framework on clean growth and climate change. Our goal wasn't to impose a one-size-fits-all approach, but to develop local solutions to address the needs and circumstances in individual jurisdictions. Everything from provincial carbon pricing regimes to cap and trade systems. And for those provinces with no price on carbon pollution, well, we introduced a federal program as a backstop. Second, we started modestly with a price that was set at $20 a ton in 2019, climbing to $50 by 2022, and then steadily increasing to $170 by the end of this decade. Third, our federal carbon pricing is not about raising revenues for government. It puts people first. Every dollar that we collect under the federal system is returned to the jurisdiction where it was collected. That keeps life affordable for Canadians everywhere without taking away the incentive to pollute less. Every time a consumer or a business buys something, there is now a financial incentive built in to choose greener options, regardless of how the proceeds are rebated or returned. The majority of proceeds from our federal regime goes directly back to Canadians, and in most cases, those rebates are more than the increased costs that consumers face. The remaining proceeds are used to support sectors including small and medium-sized businesses, municipalities, universities, and colleges, schools, hospitals, not-for-profit organizations, as well as Indigenous communities. Carbon pricing is about recognizing that pollution has a cost. It's about empowering Canadians. It's about incentivizing cleaner growth and a more sustainable future by increasing energy efficiency, switching to cleaner fuels, investing in clean technology, all things that we need for a cleaner future. It wasn't easy to get to this point. It wasn't easy politically, that's for sure. But with determination and resolve, we stayed on course in the face of opposition and some myth-making. And there's still a lot of work to do to realize our ambitious goal of reducing Canada's 2005 emission levels by up to 45% before the end of this decade. But carbon pricing clearly works, and it gets us to where we need to be, not all the way, but a significant way. And it is central to our common mission: net zero emissions by 2050, a prosperous global economy that continues to create good jobs, and a low carbon future that leaves no one behind. I know that together, that's a lot. I know it's ambitious, but the IEA is ambitious. The people around this table are ambitious. Our governments are ambitious. We will lead the way. I believe that. J'y crois. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Minister, for outlining Canada's approach to these challenges. I think it's been especially interesting and important to hear your message regarding the urgency of meeting these challenges, both our climate and clean energy transition goals, and Canada's approach to doing so in such a very determined and inclusive approach, I think is a clear model for the rest of the world as well. So thank you so very much for that. It's now my pleasure to turn to Minister Mesa of Colombia to speak about Colombia's experience and future directions in this regard. Minister Mesa, we look very much forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone else in the IEA and all my fellow panelists. I'm going to be talking about different type of challenges that the ones that my two predecessors spoke about, and then I'll touch on what we're doing in Colombia to make sure that we continue the transition in a program to reduce significantly CO2 emissions. And in particular, I would like to start by a challenge that is faced by some low and middle income countries like Colombia. Because Colombia, despite being part of the OECD and being a middle income country, will still have to close significant energy gaps. And that's what I would like to center my intervention today. So just to give you a bit of context of the challenges that we face in Colombia when we talk about policies for people-centered clean energy transitions, the first thing we need to think about is how we reach those groups of the population that live in rural areas that still don't have access to electricity and don't have access to clean electricity today. In Colombia, we have about 670,000 households live off-grid areas. This is about 50% of the territory. Obviously, it's only a fraction of our population. We have about 50 million people. But when we look at our landmass, about half of it is not connected to the national grid. Of these households, we have about 220,000 connected to the grid, so about 1/3. We still need to get to the other 2/3 of the population. And of those that are already connected to the grid, only a fraction of them, again, 1/3 of those connected, have 24-hour service. And one of the main goals that we have as part of our energy transition program is to be able to replace fuel fire generation, especially in those areas. And we've been working on a number of policies. We have to do this closing of energy gaps, mostly with public funds, which obviously are limited. So one of the main challenges that we have is obviously facing those high investment and logistical costs, being able to access this dispersed population in very remote areas of Colombia. Second is we are obviously trying to open up new businesses, lines of business for private sector to come in and help us electrify these rural areas. But obviously, this has to be done with some help from the government. So if we don't do it with 100% public funds, we have to work on some kind of subsidies, especially for the upfront capex that has to be invested in order to get to these areas. Second, we need to work in capacity building for these communities. What we've found out so far is that it's critical that we provide the technical assistance for the communities so they can operate their own energy solutions. But obviously, this has obviously cost, not only in terms of monetary, but also in terms of knowledge transfer. And second, I think we need to make sure that we have sustainable models in order to be able to get to universal electricity access for all. And in this sense, one thing we're doing that it's been proven to be quite effective is that we're using some of the royalties that we collect from oil and gas and mining activities to be able to close the gap on energy access. And obviously, these resources are limited, but we think that they can help us close the gap in the medium term. We have the goal to be able to reach 100% electrification by 2030, and hopefully with the help of the private sector, we can do it faster than that. Now, moving on to the clean energy transition, we also are very privileged because we're a country that have significant access to renewable resources such as hydro. We have about 2/3 of our power generation based on hydro, and only about 1/3 that depends on some type of fossil fuels, whether it's coal, natural gas, or other liquids. But we've been very aggressive in implementing different policies to exploit the potential on other renewable energy sources, such as solar and wind. we've created a fiscal framework over the last 3 years to make investment in these resources much more attractive to the private sector. And we've been able to now say that with these policies, with the fiscal framework and with an auction program, we've now going to increase the share of variable renewable energy in our power matrix from less than 1% in 2018 to between 12 and 14% by 2022. So this is a significant leap, and this will complement our mostly hydro dependent power matrix. And Colombia, with these changes, will certainly be one of the top 5 cleanest power matrix in the world. And the third point that I would like to make, when we think about these policies that have to be centered on people, we rely significantly on exports of thermal coal, and obviously we are diversifying away from those exports in the medium to long term. But we need to ensure that we can employ the people, the population that work on those coal mines, especially in the northern part of the country. And what we're doing is creating programs so that we can employ these people in exactly variable renewable energy and new sources such as green hydrogen, which is one of the bets that we're doing. And Colombia is leveraging on that natural wealth. I mentioned hydro before, I mentioned solar and wind, which is exactly all the inputs that we need to produce green hydrogen. We know that we need to expand and reach export markets. We've been developing very good alliances with countries that are already looking to source their green hydrogen in the short to medium term, such as Germany and Australia. And the idea is to be able to convert those existing coal mines eventually into exports of green hydrogen to developed countries. So we are now working on building our roadmap for green hydrogen, which will be presented in September. And this will be a 30-year roadmap with all the regulatory changes, commercial changes, and destination markets to be able to achieve this goal. We believe that we can replace about 85% of the current jobs that we have on coal over a 30-year period, and eventually obviously create additional jobs in this process that will require significant capital investment. And that's also why we're improving our fiscal framework to extend from variable renewable energies to other technologies such as carbon capture and storage and the production of green hydrogen. So with that, I would like to conclude and thank you again for inviting us to this important panel, and we would love to continue to contribute to these discussions going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Minister, and thank you in particular for shining a light on the issue of energy access. I think there's no more critical component to the notion of a people-centered energy transition, and very much appreciate hearing about the progress that Colombia is making in that regard, as well as the incentives that you have in place to expand renewables, again, critical for accelerating a clean energy transition. So if I may, I'd now like to turn to Commissioner and European Commissioner for Energy, Simpson, to share her remarks with the perspective from Brussels and the broader European Union. Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and actually greetings from Luxembourg today. So thank you for the opportunity to add the voice of European Union to this important conversation. And we are all well aware that achieving climate neutrality by 2050 and cutting emissions by at least 55% by 2030 are absolute priorities for the European Commission. And it is equally important that this transition is just. We don't manage to ensure fairness as we are transforming our economies, getting net zero will become impossible. And I will today focus on one specific element of this journey. When we talk about our climate goals, we usually focus on energy production and decarbonizing the supply side. And it is indeed absolutely necessary. However, it is equally important to talk about energy demand and the imperative to reduce our consumption. The cleanest and cheapest energy is the energy we do not need to produce, and this is the energy efficiency first principle, which has served as a compass for the EU energy and climate policies for years. And one topic that perfectly illustrates the importance of the energy efficiency principle is buildings. Buildings represent 40% of the energy consumption in the EU and 36% of energy-related emissions, more than any other sector. It is undeniable that new buildings are much more efficient than old ones. Most European houses were built well before any energy efficiency standards were introduced. But old buildings are not just sources of emissions, they are our homes and our town halls and our schools and government buildings. They reflect the culture and history of our countries. So we need to renovate them to help them save energy. And energy savings in buildings is not rocket science. It is about deep thermal renovations when possible, supplemented by the integration of renewable energy, such as rooftop solar panels. And most of the necessary technological solutions for a massive wave of deep renovation are already available. And it is a key issue in many countries. No country on earth is even close to achieving a zero-emission building stock. This is certainly the case in Europe, and almost 75% of our buildings are inefficient, and we only renovate about 1% every year in European Union. So in the context of our climate ambition, this is clearly not enough. And this is why we launched the renovation wave as part of the European Green Deal, to bring together various policies and link them to finance. They facilitate and accelerate building renovation all across Europe. And our objective is to double the annual renovation rate by 2030. And this means carrying out high quality renovations on at least 35 million buildings in less than 10 years. And we estimate that this would require 275 billion euros of investments every year. And this is ambitious, yes, but this is also achievable because building renovations make economic sense. The savings they generate mean that in a few years, a building renovation can become profitable. And this in turn means that costs related to renovation can be recovered and reinvested into new projects. And we already have a number of projects doing this at the local level with great success. And private funding can be mobilized through green loans or other instruments. And in fact, private funding must be mobilized, as public funding alone cannot cover the considerable investment needs. Building renovations make economic sense also because they create many jobs. This is one of the most job-intensive sectors in modern economy. And these are local, good quality jobs that demand specific skills, and great challenges require public intervention. And this is provided for by law, standards, and building codes, and public funding to make progress faster. And this is why the EU will dedicate a very significant amount of our 7-year budget and the historic recovery fund to renovation. Recovery plans prepared by the member states show that renovation is a priority. According to the plans already submitted to the European Commission, about a quarter of all green investments proposed by member states are in deep thermal renovations of private and public buildings. And I wanted to focus on the renovation wave today because it is fundamentally about the people. The renovation wave has a strong social dimension. Just transition often sounds abstract, but improving our houses is one very concrete example of what it means in practice. We all know that renovation makes our living spaces nicer and healthier, improves our quality of life, and reduces energy bills, if done well, by half. And these benefits, especially the energy savings, are particularly important for vulnerable customers. For those consumers who live in poorly insulated homes and spend a lot of their already limited income on energy. Today, nearly 34 million people in Europe live in energy poverty. And if we put them at the center of our policy, and the renovation policy in particular, we can tackle this issue head on. And this can be done, for example, by developing measures to help poor households renovate their homes, or by deploying renovation in social housing or in underprivileged neighborhoods. Saving energy by renovating our buildings is, of course, only one part of the equation of energy transition, but it is an absolutely key one, and with a strong potential to help those that are most in need, whether it is about creating jobs or reducing the energy bill of the most vulnerable. It always has a positive, inclusive impact. I'm well aware that circumstances across the globe differ significantly, but I hope this European example can be useful for my fellow members of the Global Commission. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Commissioner, and for your focus in particular on energy efficiency, building renovations, and the job creation component of that, which, as you point out, ties in so importantly to this issue of a just transition and a people-centered one. Obviously, one that will require, as you noted, significant investment, but importantly should be made a real priority. So thank you so much for that. I would like to, before concluding with thanks, just give a special note of thanks to the fact that 5 members of the Commission, the Global Commission, were able to take the time to join us today. But before we finish, and this is certainly last but not least, I'd like to turn to Selwyn Hart, the Special Advisor to the UN Secretary General on Climate Action and Assistant Secretary General for the UN Climate Action Team, to speak to us as well. So Selwyn, thank you so much for joining us. The floor is now yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and I hope not that I will not make the same mistake as my very good friend Minister Reagan, and I guess I'm unmuted, but it's certainly a pleasure to join all of you. And with less than 6 months left to go to COP26 in Glasgow, we really have no time to waste. And as the world continues to deal with the ravages of the COVID-19 pandemic, the climate crisis worsens. And I can't agree more with my friend, Dr. Burrell, who said that the race to net zero is essentially a race against time. And the race to net zero is about preventing the worst impacts of climate change. And it's a race that we can't afford to lose. The science is very clear. For us to stand a fighting chance of keeping the 1.5 degree goal within reach, global emissions need to be reduced by at least 45% from 2010 levels by 2030. And we must meet net zero emissions or achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And every 10th of a degree of warming matters. And in its recent net zero report, the IEA makes it clear that this pathway is not only technically feasible, but it's also economically feasible. And I think that this is a landmark report that should be celebrated. And I thank Dr. Burrell for his courage and leadership in ensuring that the IEA was able to publish this really important report. And the good news is that the economics and technology are on our side. And there is also growing global political support. Just last year, 30% of global emissions were covered by net zero emission targets. Today, that's up to 73%. And all G7 nations have now come on board and they've all announced more ambitious, nationally determined contributions. Financial institutions all over the world have also joined in committing to net zero. Recently, at the Earth Day Summit hosted by President Biden, financial institutions representing close to 70 trillion in assets under management joined the Glasgow Finance Alliance and committed to net zero by 2050. So the direction of travel is quite clear. Decarbonization of the global economy is inevitable. And this transition will have significant impacts, as we've heard from all of the country examples here this morning. This global transition to net zero, it must be people-centered, it must be fair, and it must be just. And I believe that we have a collective responsibility to address the challenges that will come with the speed and scale of this transition. The needs of peoples, communities, and countries must be recognized, and we must deliver concrete solutions at all levels, local, regional, and international levels. So let me be clear, the narrative from the Secretary General is that we must jumpstart the effort to finally organize the just transition. And it's a positive narrative as well. Ambition for climate action will be rewarded by commensurate social and economic returns. Just transition, as all of you have said, must be people-centered. It should be about maximizing the economic opportunities and gains, while at the same time and simultaneously managing the risk. Urgency and ambition must guide our actions and our efforts. And I just wish to make 3 points in terms of the way forward from the perspective of the United Nations. First is that support must be provided to developing countries for the development and implementation of their economic diversification strategies and just transition plans. Support to developing countries will be essential. Meeting the $100 billion goal, which is a decade-long commitment from developed countries, is essential. But $100 billion alone will not do it as we make the energy transition. The $100 billion must be seen as a foundation for the trillions that will and must be mobilized if we are to achieve net zero by 2050. But we need that commitment on the $100 billion to be fulfilled. And we're hoping that at this weekend's G7 summit, that we can see significant movement on the part of the G7 nations towards meeting their longstanding commitments. Secondly, we must deepen international cooperation. While the impacts of a just transition are local, it is essential that we all work together to ensure that we can find forums like the IEA, the ILO, really to exchange best practice on what works, what will not work, and also leverage the comparative advantage and institutional strengths of relevant international organizations. The MDBs, the multilateral development banks and regional development banks, must be brought on board. They must be an essential part and pillar and supporter of just transition policies and measures in countries and in regions. And finally, the just transition and the energy transition, the race to net zero, should leave no country behind. One-size-fits-all approaches cannot and will not work. And we've heard today many different country and regional perspectives. We must ensure that as we transition to net zero, the least developed countries in Africa, small island developing states, low income and middle income countries, all who have different circumstances and situations, all who rely on different sectors of their economy to drive economic growth and advancement, all of these countries, we must ensure that no country is left behind. One of the unfortunate legacies of the COVID crisis really is that it has shown deep disparities and inequalities within and among nations. The energy transition or race to net zero, that should not be a lasting legacy of the transition and the race to net zero. So finally, it really has been great hearing these different national and regional experiences. We are really committed, and the Secretary General is really committed to ensure that as we move towards Glasgow and beyond, that the just transition is not only part of the narrative, but that we can deliver concrete results and solutions around the just transition as we move towards a net zero climate resilient future. I thank you, and I look forward to continuing to work with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much, Selwyn, for your messages right now. Your focus on the urgency of taking steps now to meet our climate and clean energy transition goals, I think, is very important, as well as your focus on the importance of achieving a real just energy transition, in particular also the question of ensuring that emerging economies have the resources and the financing necessary to achieve the important energy transition goals that they have. This message was very much underscored by an IEA report released just yesterday, very much on this subject, financing clean energy transition. So I would encourage our listeners to take a look at that as well. I just want to thank all of the speakers once again who are part of this panel for sharing with us all of your extremely interesting and insightful perspectives, lots of lessons learned in what you had to say to us. We're very respectful of your time, but so appreciative of the messages that you've shared with us that I think have been very complimentary in many respects, underscoring the wide range of policy steps and serious commitments that need to be made at all levels with the support of citizens and all of in every country to ensure that the kind of progress is made that will lead towards a just and people-centered transition. So with that, our many thanks once again. And with this, I'd also like to turn the floor back to Brian to lead our next panel discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mary, and thanks to you and Dr. Barral for your participation today, and thanks to all our really wonderful speakers in the first half of this seminar. I think we've heard some really great perspectives, and I know we can pick up a lot of interesting points in the second half we're moving into now, where we have a really excellent discussion panel where we have 6 speakers who are just going to join us on screen now, I hope. So we can discuss these issues further. Just while we're making the transition, I want to say to you that we're really keen for everybody watching today to join the conversation. This is very much a process of discussion and debate, and we want to hear views. And right now, there's 2 ways you can do that. First of all, if you go to our website, and we'll put the web address on the screen right now, we have a survey live at the moment where we'd love to hear your opinion. It only takes 10 minutes to fill in. We'd love to get your views on some of the key issues we're discussing today and going to continue to discuss around climate change, energy transition, and the people-centered aspects of that. So please do take the time to fill in the survey. Secondly, and more immediately, if you have questions for our excellent panelists that we're about to hear from, please feel free to send them to me via Twitter. My Twitter handle is @BrianOrMotherway. I think it's on the screen now. And if you send me a tweet, I'll do my best to squeeze in the questions, and I'll particularly pick the hard ones just to put our panelists on the spot. I think they'll enjoy that too. So let's move to this really excellent panel. Let me just introduce them all, and then I'll ask some questions. We're going to hear, in no particular order, from Christine Egan, who's the Executive Director and CEO of CLASP. We're going to hear from Yetunde Fayedeye, who's the founder and director of REES Africa. We're going to also hear from Guadalupe Gonzalez, who's the Director of Electricity in the Panama National Secretary of Energy. We're also delighted to have Nick Mabey, Chief Executive and co-founder of E3G, Dr. Debajit Palit, who's the Director and Senior Fellow at the Energy Research Institute of India. And last but certainly not least, Dana Rysankova, who's the Senior Energy Specialist and Global Lead for Energy Access at the World Bank. So thank you all very much indeed for joining us today. And I hope you managed to hear the ministers and senior officials we heard from, senior officials, ministers and senior thinkers we just heard from, really excellent perspectives. And I'm going to pull in a few of them as we go. So I actually think I might start with you, Nick, because there's a connection to what we just heard from Selwyn Hart about the discussions of the G7 around finance and the need for financing, not just clean energy transitions, but people-centered clean energy transitions. Because we talk a lot about doing things right, which means investment, long-term planning, actions to make sure people are protected, the vulnerable are protected. But of course, all of this is more affordable in certain parts of the world than others. So maybe you could say a word about finance, not just for clean energies, but for people-centered clean energy transitions, please.
Thanks very much, and thanks for inviting to what was a really stimulating discussion. I was about to first say it's also important, as was mentioned, it's not just kind of equity and inclusion in the clean energy transition, but also the climate impacts transition as people are suffering now. And that's one of the main issues Selwyn was bringing up, was access to investment for resilience is equally unequal as funding for the transition. There's two elements to this for me, really, quantity and quality. On the quantity side, we are looking to the G7 not just to discuss the 100 billion, which is a kind of down payment, but actually to address some of the more structural issues around financing for particularly middle income and developing countries. And the various newspaper articles on Marshall plans or clean and green initiatives, there's a few acronyms flying around, present an opportunity, I think, to rationalize some of the funding that's out there, as well as increasing it, whether that's through the multilateral development banks or the national or the bilateral development banks. And I think that move to a kind of high quality and increased system of support to do some of the things we know need to be done, like supporting South Africa's coal phase down plan, which they're currently discussing, building green inclusive grid systems in countries like Indonesia so they can go to renewables. But all of those need to have a clear social dimension and inclusive dimension. And I think the missing link for me, as well as the quantity of finance, is the quality. And that is where I think national development banks and national financing systems are so keen. The thing about clean energy and resilience, they're capital intensive. So they exclude people without access to affordable capital, which is, supplements existing exclusions. And so there really is a critical issue, whether it's about buying renewables, insulating your house, buying an efficient air conditioner or any cooling apparatus in the world, having access to capital at affordable rates over a long enough period of time. And that's a very local thing where we think national investment banks have a really powerful role to play in driving an inclusive transition. And it's interesting to finish that the UK has just set up its own UK infrastructure bank that has two mandates. One's on net zero, but the other one is on levelling up, which is the UK term for inclusion and equity. So I think that's the task. If we're going to put more money through to help countries move forward, we also need to help countries get money to the right people, projects and places to ensure this is an inclusive transition and everybody benefits from access to these amazing technologies that should increase benefits and lower costs, but at the moment most people are excluded from because of the high upfront capital costs.
I want to come back to, but give me a minute because I want to bring another couple of perspectives and then we'll come back. Thank you, Nick. Let me go next to Yetunde. Yetunde, you're the founder of the youth-led Renewable Energy and Environmental Sustainability for Africa initiative. And you were kind enough to speak a few weeks ago at our IEA COP26 Net Zero Summit. And I was really struck by something you said afterwards on LinkedIn. I'm going to read out your own words if you don't mind, because I have them here. I have realized that our energy transition goal relies not just on our technology prowess, it is an information revolution, public perception challenge, business model, mindset, and sufficiency and lifestyle challenge. So, I mean, I think you're spot on. I guess my question to you is, because we're talking about policy today, is this something that governments can do? Is this just something that has to be led by youth? I mean, how do we enact such profound change?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. As you've rightly said, it is a multidisciplinary approach, and that means it involves all stakeholders, from the policymakers to youth, to children, to women. And we need to start seeing our stakeholders as not just beneficiaries, but as people that can also prefer solution to this people-centered energy transition. So when we talk about multidisciplinary approach, we are talking about how about we not just considering the engineers to give us the technological perspective, but also psychologists to tell us how reward and punishment methodology can help to enable people to transition. And I'll give an example, right? I was at the Lagos State International Climate Summit yesterday, and we talked about the pollution pay principle. Basically, what this means is ensuring that people that pollute pay for the pollution. And it was it was said that for people that pollute, they should essentially pay for this. However, another suggestion was to counteract that, saying that how about we incentivize people to not just pollute, but transition. So instead of using polluting methods, they can, subscribe to renewable energy or sustainable energy. And this brings me to public perception, right? When people do not understand why a policy is being implemented or a solution is being preferred, people tend to make mistakes and people tend to, not fulfill this. So we actually need people to understand why this is being done and how we can, involve their perception. So for the global average mindset, the first question that appeals is, what is in it for me? Why do you want me to make this change? People are difficult to change and we are very complex. You would agree with me. So in helping or in transitioning, we need to understand how the people's mind think and how we can essentially help them to make this transition. And in asking what is in it for me, it also brings us back to the energy trilemma, which talks about affordability, security, but you don't see anything about incentivization in the energy trilemma. That means that triangle is not complete. So when you incentivize people, you get them to make a change. And when the minister Kande was talking about carbon pricing, I initially got I got a feedback from that we can actually use carbon pricing to drive sustainable financing, giving people ownership mentality. So what are people using now? They are using fossil fuel, dirty energy, and they're paying for it, right? How can we, transition them or enable them to, take ownership of renewable energy systems from solar to wind and pay that same monies to be able to sustain or to be able to create that financing we need for the transition? I believe that the largest amount of the finance we need to transition is with the citizens. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Yatunda, and I think your words resonate very well with all of us. And it actually leads me nicely to Guadalupe, if you don't mind me coming to you, Guadalupe, because one thing that strikes me about Panama's approach in terms of its clean energy transition plan is it's very broad. It's not just about carbon or energy, but it's also about job creation, gender issues, energy access. So maybe you could tell us why you chose to take that broad perspective on clean energy.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk about the work that we are doing in Panama regarding our energy transition agenda. Actually, the reason because we took a broad approach was because we are seeing that the technology is giving us the opportunity to go in a more green path to a recovery of also needed due to the pandemic that we are living right now. Actually, we were designing our energy transition agenda before the COVID-19 exploded worldwide. And what we have been able to do during the past year is to actually validate that our energy transition agenda that includes energy efficiency, universal access to energy, electric mobility, distributed generation, and the innovation to our interconnected system actually, if we could move that forward, we can help from the energy sector to improve the amount of works that will be for the society to access. You know, normally when we talk about recovery for any reasons, we go to like conventional sectors, but we have been able to actually provide studies, realize a study where we can have numbers so that we can actually go to other entities in the government and say, look to the energy sector in order to actually come back from this pandemic that we have now in a different way, now in a green way, looking forward to the actions that we need to take into consideration regarding our environment and our energy needs in Panama. Fortunately, we have a very clean electricity matrix, and we want to go from fossil-dependent energy matrix to a more electric-based energy matrix, electricity matrix for Panama. And we believe that we can do that if we include electromobility, if we include distributed generation, so that we can also provide electricity to 93,000 families that still doesn't have electricity in the rural areas. All of that because the technology right now is enabling us and is also getting affordable to do that. So we are looking into all these technologies, and we are trying to, you know, provide a path with the energy transition agenda so that all of these blocks can work together in a better way for the Panamanian society.
Thank you, Guadalupe. And would you say, in as much as you can see it in these early stage, that among the people of Panama, that they have a positive perception of clean energy and decarbonization, they see the benefits, or do you think there's concerns that maybe it's going to have negative impacts for them?
No, actually in Panama, people are very aware and have a green consciousness actually. And the way that the National Secretariat of Energy were working is to include the society, include the stakeholders, include the people into our conversation. Actually, right now we are working on these 5 strategies that I already mentioned, and it's not only coming from the government. We have the academy, we have private sector and the government working together in commissions that we have developed in order to work on this. And also we have created a high-level commission that also includes this type of members in order to make sure that we have a transparent way to work, that we have assured commitment in the society so that we can continue with this policy, not only for the next 2 or 3 years. We want the people to be convinced that this is the way to go forward, and that this is not only for the next 10 years, but hopefully for the next 20, 30 years, so that we can, as society, come together and go into a green path. And right now, that's the work we are doing. It is very important to communicate, to work together so that we can reach to the society so that they can understand what is the transformation that is coming. We understand that this is not something that is going to happen next year or in the next 3 years. It's something that is a process that we need to be changing in the common years. But we need the people to understand what those changes are. What is an electric vehicle? What is distributed generation? We need to reach to access the people in the street so that they understand what the technologies is, what are the challenges that those changes bring into our energy sector also, but what are the benefits that they are gonna obtain from those changes, not only from the environment point of view, but also from their economic point of view, and also for their health, because going green also will benefit the health of the people. And right now we had those numbers. We worked with the program of United Nations for the environment, And we were able to develop two scenarios for our energy transition agenda and a decarbonization scenario for Panama. And it's providing fantastic numbers if we can actually reach those scenarios for Panama. I think we are one of the few countries that have developed such type of studies. And those are practically the tools that we are needing to reach other members of the governments, of the other members of the society, so that they can jump in and work together with us in reaching our energy transition objectives.
Thank you, Guadalupe. And Christine, that point must resonate with you, because the idea of the other benefits that citizens and consumers feel from clean energy actions is, of course, a very strong debate around energy efficiency, particularly its opportunity, let's say, to bring early benefits to people in terms of changes. Maybe you could say a word about kind of how policy for energy efficiency can be designed with those kind of wide benefits to people in mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective, if we really want this clean energy transition to be just and to be people-centered, we see it as a marrying, really, of SDG 7 and SDG 13. People want improved lives, they want improved livelihoods, and they want a livable planet. And so we need to think about how we incent all of that. Coincidentally, I have family who are farmers in Switzerland, who I've been in a very intense debate with about the tax that was discussed. And if you are a farmer and you own your vehicle and it's well paid off, you may really value a livable planet and would love to have an electric vehicle, but there obviously need to be subsidies and incentives to encourage that transition compared to a paid off piece of machinery that still works fine. And so I think we just have to be quite clear that we have to actually, as was said, people are complex and they want their own lives improved. You know, there's a ton of evidence, for example, that the pandemic has affected, hundreds of millions of subsistence farmers who lack access to reliable energy, to reliable, efficient technologies. The World Food Program is estimating the number of people facing acute hunger would more than double from 135 million to 318 million. And of course, the worst effects of that will be felt in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. But there's we can incent and provide support, for example, to efficient solar water pumps and cold storage that would not only address this short-term insecurity, but would provide long-term, stronger agricultural value chains that benefit small farm holders in the long run. And so I think it's about really aligning our energy efficiency policy to the realistic benefit, thinking about what are our people in the world we think about these clean energy transitions and we tend to focus on the systems and the supply sources. People don't buy watts. People don't buy solar versus nuclear versus coal. They buy energy service. They buy lighting. They buy cooling. They buy relief from the climate when they need a fan to simply live, when it becomes a health sector, a health crisis if they don't have it. So I think our policies simply have to be more inclusive and more realistic about intertwining our climate goals, our access goals with real people's lives and the benefits that accrue to them.
Thank you, Christine. One particular aspect, of course, that has come up many times is energy access. And I do think we have to look at a world where there's a difference between countries talking about clean energy transitions when energy is abundant and affordable and places where that's not true. And Dana, let me come to you, because I guess my question is, are clean energy transitions and improving access always aligned, or is there a temptation to see them as somewhat in competition? How would you see that issue?
Oh, thanks a lot for that question. And first of all, thanks for being at this panel and for the contributions of the panelists. It's really interesting, right? Because each panelist has brought different elements of the just transition, but no one has said anything I would disagree with, right? Which really shows how how big issue this is and how we need to think about it in the broad terms. So I believe that energy access really is essential in order to have successful energy transition. I don't think you can talk about energy transition without really acknowledging that you have significant proportion of the planet. You have almost 800 million people that if they go home, they cannot turn on the light. They don't have a switch at home that turns on the light. Energy transition, what does it mean for them? You know, this is how they have lived for centuries. They're not part of the energy transition. Even worse, you have people who come home and each time they actually cook a lunch or dinner, they're risking their life because little by little, they're dying out of indoor air pollution. So unless we bring these people in, the energy transition for me will be a failure. And in order to do so, though, I think what we need to think about is really bring the story, because I think there is a temptation to forget these people. And especially when we sort of start thinking about big numbers, right? Where are the sort of big reductions in terms of emission reductions, and put the resources in there. So we really, you know, obviously energy access, expanding energy access can have climate benefits as well. We have to do it in the right way so that we have these climate benefits. But really, we can't think of that as the driver of financing for energy access. We really have to think of it in terms of building this inclusivity and building the resilience for the population moving forward. And what I would like to argue is that really, in order to do so, it's not just that, you know, energy access is improving the inclusiveness of energy transition. We also need to think of how to do energy access in a more inclusive way, because you know, I'd like to just mention a few statistics that really are telling that, you know, the people without access today are people that are among the poorest, among the most vulnerable groups on the planet. So we have about, as I have said, about 760 million people without electricity. But, you know, these people, there's a progress. There was 1.2 billion about 10 years ago, but what's happening is that the progress is uneven. And so it actually increases disparities. Of these people now, 3/4 are in sub-Saharan Africa, 85% people are in rural areas, and increasingly in remote places. And what I find really quite concerning is that half of the people without electricity access are people that live in countries that are considered fragile or in conflict and violence situations. And many of those people are displaced people, and the vast majority of displaced people have no access, and they are already very vulnerable. The proportion of women among the population that doesn't have electricity access is high. The women are overrepresented in this group as well. And furthermore, we have 2.6 billion people that don't have access to clean cooking. WHO has already determined this is, you know, 4 million people unnecessarily die out of indoor air pollution every year. We have calculated that the cost of inaction on the clean cooking side leads to $2 trillion of basically damage that is based on a year, that is based on the gender, the health, and the climate negative impacts. So as much as there may be a temptation maybe to forget this part and focus on what are sort of big items in terms of decarbonization, we cannot afford to do that.
Thank you, Dana. And Debashit, that must resonate with you, because India is such an interesting story because it has made such really strong progress on both efficiency and renewables, other aspects of clean energy in the context of very strong growth, but at the same time, really fantastic progress in recent years on electricity access. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on how it has been possible to do all of that successfully at the same time.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and it's a pleasure to be here in this webinar. This one I can see Dana, with whom I have also worked earlier. So in India, I think we are discussing about two things. One is the energy access, the other is the clean energy transition. And I think in India, this one we have seen it at in some both together and also away from each other. So I will explain it what exactly it is. So we had almost 25% of the world's unelectrified population 7-8. Now we have already achieved near universal electrification. Maybe around 500,000 house population may not have electricity access, who are in extreme remote or maybe in forested area or not willing to take electricity connection because of various reasons. Otherwise, we have almost achieved near universal electrification. So in the last little more than a decade, we have achieved that. Now in mid 2000, we had also started the wind revolution and followed it up with the solar mission, the national solar mission. But then we have not linked both the two together. So what we have done is that we just expanded the electricity access in a programmatic mode. And that's a great example where if you do a project in a programmatic mode with structured implementation systems involving not just in both the federal government and also the provincial government, you can achieve something. But most importantly, Indian government spent almost like 15 to 20 billion US dollar from the government funds, the public funds, to expand the electrification rate in India. And that, I think, is one of the key reasons for us to achieve this near universal electrification. Having said that, I think now as a second step, we are also catching up on the energy transition roadmap. So solar and wind are cheapest electricity now in India, cheaper than the thermal coal. When the sun is shining and the wind is blowing, we hope that in the next few years, the round-the-clock electricity will also become competitive with thermal coal. And we haven't started any coal plant during the last almost 3-4 years, and there has not been any financial sanction for a coal plant by the government of India also, public sector coal plant. And we hope that there would be hardly any new addition of coal plant in the near future. This one. So I think we have followed a pathway by which we targeted each of these in a different way and have tried to solve the problem. In case of clean cooking, we have 80 million connections which has been provided. Of course, this is clean cooking is a more complex subject than the electricity, because in electricity, there is a direct linkages to livelihood and productive applications, and there is a benefit to the consumer, so they tend to move towards, tend to get benefit out of that. Whereas in clean cooking, the benefits are little long term, and that too, the direct benefits are to the women and the men. In a gender, the son of parlance, the men may not be too much involved in the benefits of the clean cooking. So probably because the income is a big issue in India, income inelasticity is a big issue. So probably though 80 million connections have been provided, everybody is not using the LPG stove, and we still have a long way to go before people can start adopting the LPG stove, moving away from the biomass stove. They are now using both this one. So that's something that we have tried to do over the years. One point that I would definitely like to raise here is about the policy certainty and the fact that our belief that off-grid systems are the least cost option. We did a study and we found that based on the literature review from different countries, there are no hard evidence to say that off-grid systems are the least cost options, primarily because of the storage. So while off-grid systems definitely are more people-centric, they are more, I would say, this one closer to the ground reality. But then we also have to work quite a bit on how we can reduce the price of the storage so that they also become viable as an option for energy access, and that to a clean energy access. This one. So this is something that's a work in hand. I think researchers should get together to do something here. The other point that I would like to mention is that we always talk about the technology and the finance. It's more of a techno-financial centric planning. We are not taking into account, or has not trying to take into account during our planning exercise, the social aspects of it. So it's extremely important to understand the local need and aspiration of the community so as to design your systems. If you don't do that, then maybe this one, a few years down the line, the aspiration level might increase, and you have a technology which is unable to meet the aspiration of the community. Say a small solar home systems, and the community wants to run a freezer, cannot run the freezer with the solar home systems because their aspiration level is high. So we have to see that both in terms of technology and finance, we also have to take into account the social side of it, so as to understand and greater acknowledge the aspiration of the local community. If we can do that, probably our job would be much easier for clean energy transition. After energy access, the next part is the clean energy transition, where energy access is not yet this one has not yet been done. It will be much easier for that transition. So I will stop here.
Thank you very much, Abhijit. There's a lot of interesting points there. And colleagues, we don't have a lot of time, but if you have a few minutes to overstay our official time, I don't want to stop yet because I'm enjoying it and I hope you are too. There's a few points I want to pick up on before we close. And I'm going to start, Christine, quickly with you, because on that access point, we do tend to focus on the supply side, but of course, efficiency is a great tool for enhancing access as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, we know to the small solar home system that was just discussed, we know that that 20-watt system, when you purchase it, if you have maybe you're providing a home a single incandescent bulb, and if the products are more efficient, you maybe get 3-4 LED lights and an 8-watt television. And suddenly what you actually have is a tool where the mother in the house has a source of information, entertainment, education for her children, and maybe a couple of hours to start a small business. And the family's income and her status within her household improves and increases. Again, giving her a better life and a better livelihood, actually. I think so obviously this is incredibly important. Potentially also the family can afford a smaller system with efficient devices, right? It really is the tail that wags the dog in terms of efficiency, selling solar, because you get more energy service. The value prop is simply more appealing to folks, as Donna said, who are in many of the 800 million left are in very poor circumstances. And sparing very sparse capital to make this investment. And so it's an incredibly important. I will just note just on the efficient appliance is also just one thing that hasn't come up is, there are other more intangible benefits that I think it's not just straight economic benefits, but, we need to think about the fact that modern household appliances, for example, reduce drudgery, the work that women do to collect water, to pump water, these are to collect biomass, right? If we have efficient solar water pumps, if we have efficient stoves, there's obviously these life-changing health effects. But suddenly you have less drudgery, more time for other paid work. We're reducing, this non-paid work is typically absorbed by women. And this is a gender empowerment campaign. And so these have many, many benefits in the off-grid context. And just want to really emphasize Donna's point that as we pursue our climate objectives, we really can't forget that we have an obligation if we really are talking about equity to improve and raise the lives of those off the grid.
Thank you. That's a point well worth making. Nick, can I go back to you? Because I was listening earlier to the Swiss minister and I was reflecting, it's not often you hear a minister on a webinar proudly boasting about how they're going to raise the cost of flying and driving and things like that. Not only that, but putting it to a public vote. And of course, you have particular experience of putting things to public votes. But do you think that Switzerland is a new dawn? Governments aren't always that keen to embrace policies that involve rising consumer costs. But while there are many benefits to clean energy, things like carbon taxation, changing energy pricing are certainly part of the policy portfolio. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the ministers were very frank and clear about the imperative for an inclusive transition to move forward. And that, for me, has two legs. One is changing the way those of us who are kind of energy experts or technocrats think about the transition. So we're not looking for kind of least economic cost in a way as maximum social benefit, which includes economic cost, but has much broader, as others have said. And actually redesign our utility management, our competitive systems, our way of doing policy, both in a technocratic sense, so we actually identify and include those benefits. So just thinking about carbon price doesn't capture, the productive benefit of cooling or resilience. We're actually seeing a big push at the G7 to include resilience in economic calculation because we're underinvesting in resilience. So I think to deliver this agenda, one, there's a reform agenda, think differently about policy, regulation and markets, so they deliver these benefits more naturally. So we're not always kind of trying to subsidize our way to these benefits, they're more integral. But there's also a political issue, which is what you've raised, is that this is about where power lies and who makes choices. And if we can't make good choices now, so we still have fuel poor people in the G7, in Germany, in the UK. Why? Because we make bad decisions about allocation of capital. We can't drive a rapid transition with those inequalities still in our system. So that's also about giving people and parliaments more transparency, more rights, more gender disaggregation. So those decisions are more transparent because we all know, particularly energy is very captured by incumbents and large organizations with access to closed rooms where decisions are made. And we cannot make the choices of the transition in that system. So we need technocratic reform, but we also need democratic reform. So people have rights, not just stakeholders. And only with that are we going to get the public agreement to make the kind of choices the Swiss minister moved to. I think their system kind of includes that and has a long tradition of that. I think other systems, including across the European Union, to be honest, and the UK and the US, need to evolve that rights-based participative decision-making, which will drive the right choices for the majority, not just for those people who care about grids, which is a small minority.
You trust the publics of the world, that if you put the decision-making power in their hands, they will make the right decisions. I'm not saying
the evidence shows that if you give choices, and there's really interesting ways of doing that, like participative voting and polling, that people choose the social value maximum outcomes, especially if you use, rather than, and this has been tested in everywhere from democracies to autocracies, with marginalized groups, with educated groups. Most of our systems were designed in the late 19th, early 20th century, where we had very different power relations and very different expectations of the way our societies worked. And the climate crisis, to be honest, is a way of updating our decision-making systems to reflect the current social contract and the social contract we need to drive climate change. And I think that's actually a really powerful way of giving us the social license for the rapid transition, but also maximizing the benefits of it. So, the horrible word intersectionality is sometimes jumped on. I find it much easier. It is people-centered, but people need a voice, not just a consultation. I think that's where we fundamentally move away from that consultative model.
Thank you, Nick. And colleagues, time is upon us, I'm sorry, but I want to give the last word to you, Yetunde, picking up on that point, because you work in a number of countries on environmental sustainability awareness campaigns. And I guess I want to ask you whether you're optimistic or pessimistic, particularly around this question of, are people willing to change their lifestyles? Are they embracing these complex societal questions? Speaking on behalf of a generation, I'm sorry that the next generation has to be asked these questions, but what's your sense? Would you say that you're optimistic? You're on mute, sorry, Yetunde.
Okay, I'm actually optimistic because what we face is something that would define if our children will have to go to museums to see what trees look like. And access to energy being a major contributor to our environmental challenges, climate change to be specific, is we don't have a choice. We have to be optimistic about this because it means that if we do not have Earth to live in, then there is no place for us. So there is no plan B, it's just plan A, right? And I totally agree with what Mr. Nick has said. He said we should move from a consultative, and that's basically my own takeaway point. We have to give them the right, because access to electricity or energy is not a luxury. It is a basic human right. And this brings me to energy justice. So being optimistic is women being able to move from, women being primary energy managers to be able to move from biomass or fossil fuel generated energy to sustainable energies that can impact their lifestyle and livelihood. And it's not just about being optimistic. It's about a goal that needs to be achieved. So when we have this mindset of when we pursue it this way, I think that we can be able to achieve it. And just to add to what has been said, right? When we were talking about access to energy being the first point of contact, I've worked in rural areas, like you said. I've worked in Nigeria, and I've also had access to work in Ghana. And I've been to the most remote communities in Nigeria. And one of the things that reckons with this transition is that it is achievable. Access to energy and energy transition is achievable. We can move them to tier 1 or tier 2, but it is achievable. Take, for example, solar home systems or even solar microgrids. We achieve access to energy, but we also have managed to transition them into, the sustainable energy we want to see, so to speak. And in this, we've understood that these people, for them to actually adopt the ownership mentality, they need to be incentivized. So there's a policy in Nigeria that encourages a price ceiling for mini grids, solar mini grids, and this purport people cannot afford. So obviously they're already marginalized. So when we go into this remote poor communities, we give them this solar microgrids and solar home systems for free. Now, the only way for them to continually maintain that system, because obviously we cannot be with them all the time, is to enable incentivization. So we gather the youths in these communities and we tell them that, you know what, the community is going to give you a certain specific amount to be able to, monitor the systems, ensure that the solar panels are cleaned, ensure that, things are working appropriately. And in this way, we hand over the ownership to these communities, and in that they can actually transition from this tier 1 electricity to tier 2 by adding either more storage or bringing more modular systems into the whole system. So there is a way we can achieve this, and it's not an option of being optimistic. It's not a choice. It's about us having to achieve this, because it is reliant on whether our children have to go to museums to see what trees look like, or even securing our future generations to come.
So that seems a good note to end on. Thank you very much, Yatenda. And thank you to all our speakers. I'm sorry we don't have another couple of hours to speak about this, but next time you're in Paris, I'll buy you a beer and we'll pick up a few dozen of the questions I have on the tips of my tongue. So Devajit, Guadalupe, Dana, Nick, Christine, and Yatenda, thank you all so much for participating in this discussion. And also thanks to our previous speakers, our ministers, commission members, and other thought leaders. I hope everybody watching us has enjoyed this discussion, and do please get in touch. And in particular, if you go to our website and take our survey, we'd love to hear your views on the issues we've been discussing here today. And we'll have more events on this topic quite soon, so we hope to see you again. So thank you very much to everybody, and have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you very much.